Porcelain is one of the greatest inventions of China, and one in human history as well. Books and drawings are made of paper. Steel and iron may be damaged, but porcelain surpasses even steel. It never breaks, never.
It is a history of interconnectedness. You can trace big social movement.
One not only uses it, it also reveals the taste of those who use it.
And if a piece would break, my heart would break with it.
There are 3 Chinese words that have been incorporated into English. There is tea, which we exported, silk, the fabric, and then there is China, all of which are now official words in English.
So broken glass, you melt down and make new glass. Textiles rot away, or you mash them up, turn them into paper. Almost every other material destroys itself or is turned into something else as it goes on. Only pottery is there and stays there.
The ancient cistern of Dresden in eastern Germany. On the shore of the Elbe stands a Baroque-style building, the Zwinger Palace. "300 years ago, a Saxon king was tormented by a certain craze in this grand, glamorous palace. In the 17th and 18th century, a material called white gold sent many European courts into a craze like an infectious disease. It wasn't what we know as platinum today, but its mysterious shine ensnared everyone just the same. It was China. In 1717, Augustus II, King of Prussia, made a shocking deal that demonstrated to the world what head over heels in love actually meant. He exchanged 600 of his fully armored dragoons, the elite regiment that once fought and won wars for him, for 151 porcelain pieces from the Kangxi Era. Despite not being antiques during that time, each piece of china was still worth 4 warriors. It was truly white gold. As time goes by, the legend remains. Augustus II and those dragoons may have become history long ago, but those porcelain pieces are still kept in Zwinger Palace, now a part of Germany's state art collection. These 7 blue and white porcelain jars are part of them. They now have a new name, the Dragoon jars. In fact, over 1,200 years ago, in the Tang Dynasty, porcelain already created a craze of desire so clear transparent and mild despite its tranquil appearance. For it, people have camped out in desolate deserts and barely escaped death in the tumultuous sea. Ruins in seas of sand and wrecked ships sunk in the oceans have never ended people's love for it. Thus began a long history of Chinese international trade and a symphony of civilization under the reverberating clinks of various kinds of porcelain. This symphony was still growing in intensity until 300 years ago, and China, by convention, was made synonymous with porcelain.
Porcelain is one of China's greatest inventions and a great invention in human history.
Porcelain doesn't exist in nature, that is without question. Despite it being an affordable and common material nowadays, since the maturation of its production 1800 years ago to the first batch of hard porcelain produced in Europe 300 years ago, porcelain manufacturing was almost exclusive to China for over 1,000 years, passing only to a few neighboring countries. In an ancient world without patents, this does sound somewhat unimaginable. Where did porcelain come from, and how did it spread across the world? Is its long history really so mysterious?
It's a major breakthrough in the history of science. It's a staple craft in China.
Was a secret. You know, the Chinese knew that they had a product that was valuable.
In Chinese, porcelain and pottery are often grouped as one category called Tao Qi. The Chinese character for porcelain can be taken apart as secondary tile. Tiles are pottery, and porcelain came from pottery. In the Song dynasty, Sima Guang called porcelain the hard form of pottery. Thus, to find the source of porcelain, we must first look into the source of pottery. China may have dominance in porcelain production, but its predecessor, pottery, was found all over the world. Looking at all major civilizations, it is hard to say who was the earliest pottery expert. Archaeological findings showed that pottery existed in North Africa 10,000 years ago. Then it was discovered that Jomon handmade pots from Japan preceded 10,000 years. At the end of 2012, the U.S. Archaeology magazine selected the top 10 archaeological discoveries in the world then, and the ancient pottery fragments found in the Xianren cave site in Jiangxi, China, was on the list. Dating back to 20,000 years ago, they are the oldest pottery fragments found currently in the world. After restoration, they were determined to be components of a big pot. Coincidentally, Xianren Cave is only about 70 kilometers from the porcelain town of Jingde. In the Stone Age, early humans used natural rocks, plants, and animal bones as containers with simple modifications. But they were inconvenient and hard to heat up with fire. Those humans already mastered how to use fire, which lit up the dark, chased away the cold, and scared off wild beasts. But most importantly, it changed their habit of eating raw food for cooked, healthier food, extending their lifespan and allowing them to propagate. Therefore, they were in urgent need of a container that could be used to process cooked food. Nigel Wood, an Englishman in his 60s, has loved Chinese culture all his life. His home is almost a pottery workshop. However, Woods is no ordinary craftsman. He is an internationally renowned scholar on pottery and porcelain. he is also highly curious about the origin of pottery and porcelain.
I think that's a very, very difficult subject. Lots of scholars have tried to understand this great leap, that allowed this to happen. Some people think that if clay were used inside a basket to make it waterproof and it were put on a fire, then you would end up with a ceramic vessel. A lot of questions still on the very beginnings of fired vessels.
Chinese historical texts credited Emperors Yan and Huang with the invention of pottery. According to legend, a man from Ningfeng covered a fish in mud and grilled it in fire to cook. Then he left for something urgent, and when he came back, the fish was burnt. However, the mud on the fish's body became a hard shell that didn't leak one drop of water. The attentive man was inspired and repeated the process. After a long time of firing, an earth-made container was born. Emperor Huang was delighted and appointed Ningfeng Zi as the pottery official. This apparently was at least 10,000 years later than the pottery fragments found in Xianren Cave in Jiangxi. But the invention process it conveyed was most representative, no less than Newton and the apple. As an English scholar said, pottery is an index of civilization. In that case, pottery was certainly not exclusive to one certain region or tribe. Archaeological findings increasingly show that despite differences in time, there are signs of pottery in almost every ancient civilization in the world. The question many academics are asking themselves is, was it passed on in a master-apprentice relationship? Or was the pottery invented by chance repeatedly across the world? In Xishuangbanna, Yunnan, China, fewer and fewer make pottery the traditional way, like Yunnan does. Due to porcelain catching up, the age of pottery now seems like a memory from long ago. However, to Yu Nanan, her husband's early passing forced her to rely on her only craft to make a living.
Sometimes it's too hard, and I wish for help as well.
Surprisingly, there is no kiln in Yu Nanan's sparse workshop. How does she fire her pottery? The answer is surprisingly simple. All Yu Nanan does is gather a pile of wood on the ground, put the greenware directly on it, cover it all around with straw, then seal everything tight with mud. Finally, she lights a fire through a small hole, and then all that's left is a 10-hour wait. This was the same method Ningfeng Zi used during Emperor Huang's era. Despite the primitive method, it provides ample proof for the origin and spread of pottery. Before our ancestors invented the kiln, this firing by piling on flat land was once commonly used. On a certain level, it served insulating and thermostatic purposes. Some scholars believe current historical research greatly underestimated the reach of long-distance communication across regions of ancient men. The evidence being the pointed bottom jars found in almost every civilization. Its appearance is baffling. What is the purpose of the pointed bottom? Popular belief sees them as tools to obtain water. When the pointed bottom jar is placed in water, the heavier top half causes the jar to tip over, allowing water to flow into the mouth of the jar. However, some scholars hold opposite views, believing it to be a ceremonial container. Whatever it is, without any interaction between civilizations, the question remains why this strange container was widely popular thousands of years ago.
Interaction has always been a particularly attractive and most complicated question. Human mobility is very strong as well. You must take into consideration how long this activity went on, possibly for hundreds, even thousands of years.
Perhaps pottery was passed along between different civilizations, or maybe they developed independently, because the raw material for pottery can be found and obtained almost anywhere. Similarly, water is essential to humankind. When earth meets water, it softens and becomes malleable to be made into various tools and containers. In the two great civilizations of the East and West, both include stories of the molding of clay into humans, one being Nuwa, the other god. Did one of them copy the other, or was it just mere coincidence? However, we can at least say this match between water and earth formed the basis of civilization. All they need is fire, the element to transform them. When natural fire became a torch in the human hand, it transformed earth and its flames to pottery. Without fire, humans might never have broken out of prehistoric times. Fire's function in pottery lies in its temperature. Yunnanen's simple method may allow her pottery to be fired at almost 900 degrees Celsius, but without a kiln, it is most difficult to control the temperature. After a whole night, Yunnanen's pottery is finally ready. At this point, the outer mud shell is burnt and crumbling. Due to uneven temperature, some of the pottery inside is broken, while some of it is not fired thoroughly, and the color also appears uneven. This is a common occurrence with primitively made pottery. Yunnanen's children have given up this heritage to work in the rubber forest. In 1954, archaeologists found not only large numbers of colored pottery, but also 6 nondescript earth mounds at the Banpo site east of Xi'an. After further examination, they were confirmed to be pottery kilns for people in Banpo, one of the earliest kilns in the New Stone Age. Because of the separation of the combustion chamber and the firing chamber, the fire won't come into direct contact with the greenware, but the kiln is more tightly sealed, ensuring not only a temperature of over 900 degrees Celsius inside the kiln, but also even distribution of the heat. That means the people of Banpo were already more skilled at pottery than Yunnanen 6,000 years ago. They had already noted the importance of temperature to the quality of the pottery. This human face, fish body pattern came from a colored ceramic pot found in Banpo. But this beautiful pot played a tragic role in a terrible story. A baby who died at birth was placed inside the ceramic coffin. As the lid to the pot was put in place, the child was forever separated from its parents. Time goes on, but this beautiful fish-patterned pot passes on a sadness from ancient times. At the same time, the culture of ceramics continued to proceed, coincidentally, in parallel across the world. From the Nile to Mesopotamia, from the Sindhu to the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, the ceramics were adorned not only by birds, animals, plants, and scenery, but also with human figures and transport vehicles. The prayers and hopes of the people, both in reality and in imagination, were freely expressed in the ceramics. This is the signature eggshell ceramic from the Longshan culture 4,000 years ago. The wall of this goblet is within 1 millimeter at its thickest and less than 0.2 millimeters at its thinnest, truly thin as eggshells. Furthermore, due to having fine clay as its raw material, as well as the effects of charcoal smoke and polishing, it is shiny black all over. It has been acclaimed as the epitome of prehistoric pottery and was the most intricate work on earth at the time.
Black pottery was the most advanced technique, possibly only mastered by a few at a time. And those few most likely of the noble class. It was an advanced technique mastered by the upper class.
Even with the technological advancement of today, making eggshell ceramics is no easy task. Moreover, due to its extreme lightness and delicacy, even a revered tribal leader would be cautious when using it. Why did our ancestors pour such time and effort into this seemingly impractical task? There seems to be just one solution. This was never an everyday utensil, but a ceremonial utensil that symbolized status and reverence in major ceremonies and rituals. From coarse pottery to colored pottery, from colored pottery to black pottery, an ever-progressing trend is starting to be revealed. Human desire for earthenware was becoming more elegant and spiritual. Eggshell pottery is, in fact, very close to the characteristics of porcelain: hard, dense, light, and shiny. Perhaps it was this unrelenting pursuit that brought about the creation of porcelain. Bai Zhongjun and his wife from Chengcheng, Shaanxi, have always made pottery the traditional way, by using clay mixed with sand. However, this kind of firing at low temperature causes the sand-tempered pottery to be full of tiny leaks, making it loose and easily breakable, and leakage occurs quickly when holding water. This is the same as pottery made in early times. Despite the primitive skill and low selling cost, Bai Zhongjun is reluctant to give up. No matter how hard the work is, it was passed down through generations. It cannot be changed, just like the destinies of father and son. Heaven's blessing is not an answer for historical happenings. But other than that, how did the Chinese manage to find a solution to almost all difficulties in pottery making overnight? It may sound unbelievable, but that was what happened. The pottery from Longshan culture is world-renowned, but apart from black pottery, few know of another kind of pottery, white pottery, that was even more similar to porcelain. The name of this ceramic is called gui. Its unique white color is worth noting. It turned out that it wasn't made from ordinary clay, but from clay with a high content of porcelain clay. Instead of breaking, porcelain clay becomes even stronger, finer, denser, and waterproof at high temperatures of over 1200 degrees Celsius. If it was covered in glaze, it would essentially be the same as porcelain. The question is, in the New Stone Age 4,000 years ago, who first discovered the secret of porcelain clay? Whenever this question arises, one laments the lack of written language.
History of interconnectedness, that particularly when you come into the historic period, you can trace big social movements, you can make connections.
Came later, there was still no sign of glaze. In Washan, Shimeng County, Yunnan, the thick mountain forest is swallowed in a sea of clouds. This closed environment hides many ancient historical remains. Wengaka village lies deep inside Washan. Many villagers were once hunters, as Yanji is. For hundreds of thousands of years, this forest has satisfied people's various needs. Today, the world seems to have changed. Yanji returns home empty-handed. Yan Bulao decides to reclaim his father's craft, pottery making. A man from outside the mountain bought a piece of Wa tribal pottery his father made before he passed at a high price. The customer was enamored by this glazed ceramic piece. To Yan Bulao, pottery seems much more profitable than hunting. Apart from that piece of ceramics, Yan Bulao's father also left him a small piece of pine tar-like substance. The secret of the glaze-like shine on wall earthenware lies completely in this substance. Yan Bulao needs to go into the forest to find more pine tar. Yet in this primary forest in the mountains, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Once the pottery is bisque-fired, Yan Bulao smears the pine tar on the surface of the clay while it is still hot, so that it will penetrate inside to strengthen the clay and make it waterproof. Strangely, the pine tar doesn't make his pottery shine. He still hasn't mastered his father's secret. Certainly, this is one of the oldest existing pottery glazing methods today. Although there are no historical records on this, humans had undoubtedly been trying different methods to make pottery colorful and dazzling throughout the ages. In this goat paradise outside Yaotou village, Chengcheng County, Shanxi, there are scattered over 100 old abandoned kilns. Despite today's desolate scene, one can still vaguely feel how it was once prosperous and busy. Nowadays, only Zhou Tiehuai and his wife still live on this abandoned mountain with their pottery, their failing bodies tying them down firmly to this place. The abandoned kilns of Yaotou village all go back at least a century. This is an old kiln from the Douguang period in the Qing dynasty. On its wall, around the bend, it's as if there hangs a scenic painting. Perhaps a few thousand years ago, the kiln workers saw the same scene as well. Its surface is smooth, as if covered in a shining layer of sweat beads. Hence the name, kiln sweat drops. They are oil stains formed from burning fuel inside the kiln. Over long periods of accumulation with chemical reactions under the 1200 degrees Celsius temperature, a glass-like substance is formed.
After a long time of firing in the kiln, the condensation would sometimes, like when we cook rice, fall from above and onto the pottery to form a bright, shiny layer, adding a protective layer to the pottery itself.
Over time, the phenomenon in the kiln could have inspired our ancestors to pursue this shiny effect on the pottery. And so, glaze was born. Extensive study of ancient kilns show that straw and wood were the major fuel used in kilns at the time. Their ashes was an important source of the manufacturing of glaze. As the saying goes, no ashes, no glaze. No less than 3,000 years ago, the Chinese had already mastered the technique of ash glaze. It is proven that China wasn't the first country to use the glaze technique. 4,000 years ago, traces of glaze had appeared in the sacred temples of ancient Egypt. However, What made China's pottery culture suddenly slow down when it almost reached the level of porcelain? Ceremonial objects granted pottery spirit and promoted its rapid development. But in China, since the Xia and Shang dynasties, such objects gradually withdrew from the sacred hall. Their spotlight was increasingly replaced by another material. Many people thought ancient bronze objects came originally in that green color. In fact, it is the result of hundreds and thousands of years of oxidization. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. Fresh out of the furnace, it feels and looks completely like gold. Its sturdiness, strength, and elegant grandeur does make fragile pottery pale in comparison. Chinese pottery could only find another way to develop. Archaeological evidence showed that during the Shang dynasty, white pottery made from porcelain clay and fired at high temperatures matured in technique. With the appearance of glaze, ceramics gradually shook off the outdated feel of the original color and slipped on shiny new clothes. However, many scholars believed the preliminary phase of Chinese porcelain had already arrived silently under the shadow of bronze objects in the form of glazed pottery or proto-porcelain.
Steel and iron may be damaged, but porcelain surpasses even steel. It never breaks, never.
Despite its origins in pottery and ceramics, porcelain is also essentially different. First, its greenware must be made from porcelain clay. Second, it must be fired at over 1200 degrees Celsius. When the firing is done, the porcelain is strong and dense and highly waterproof. Third, its surface must be covered in high-temperature, glass-quality glaze, shiny and smooth. So-called proto-porcelain might be made from less pure porcelain clay. The firing temperature might be high but unstable, and the source of glazes were also less varied. Despite these conflicting requirements, what is undeniable is that pottery didn't transform into porcelain overnight. It must have gone through a long, gradual process. In other ancient civilizations in the world, pottery roamed a vast era of up to 10,000 years, yet never transcended to the highest level of porcelain. They were so close, yet so far. By comparison, Chinese civilization was fortunate. With farmland on one side and the heavens on the other, its deeply rooted farming culture provided endless creative inspiration for it. Despite that, it took over 1,000 years for proto-porcelain to develop into mature porcelain. In Shipu village, Shangyu, Zhejiang, 58-year-old Dong Shui-gen is in charge of looking after a thriving tea plantation. Zhejiang is famous for its tea because of the ideal geography and climate. However, Dong says it's because of the good tea equipment that prompts the tea trees to grow hard. Dong Shui-gen's family is close by the lush Xifeng Mountain, an unfathomable mystery for many. An ordinary bamboo forest covers the north side of the mountain, called Xiaoxiantan, Little Sacred Altar. No one can tell where the gods are from, but the word sacred is enough to kickstart one's imagination. Perhaps one could take in a part of a long-lost civilization from the porcelain fragments scattered on the grass. In the 1970s, someone finally bent down and picked up a few of these memory fragments from this long-forgotten and abandoned kiln. After a series of chemical and physics decoding, the message from 1800 years ago was finally understood. These shattered porcelain fragments were enough to piece together a memorial that would have had people looking up at it. They are an ancient treasure, strong, waterproof, heavily glazed, with a reverberating sound that rivals that of today's porcelain. If we could turn back time, we would see a lively, bustling scene in the Eastern Han Dynasty. The kiln would be firing strong, and smoke would be rising from it. Porcelain clay could be found everywhere, and pine trees covered the mountains. All the materials, fuel, and glaze needed for making porcelain could all be easily obtained. The dragon kiln was at the height of its development since its invention in the Shang Dynasty, easily bringing the firing temperature to 1300 degrees Celsius. All in all, this met the necessary conditions of making porcelain. From proto-porcelain to mature porcelain, the process finally came to fruition after 1,000 years of nurturing. To this day, the earliest known porcelain object with actual meaning came from this place, Xiaoxiantan. Tiger container, an awkward-looking tiger with its mouth wide open, is often seen when porcelain was first born. It is not the most beautiful, yet it is funny and lively. Why was the elegant porcelain so full of comedic fun at its birth? Some say it was an iron that held hot water or charcoal. Some say it was just a water container for watering flowers. Some even say it was a night urinal for men in ancient times. Despite there being no definite answer, they were all used by the bed or behind the house. Why didn't porcelain go its old route of ceremonial objects instead of becoming so down-to-earth with the people? Other porcelain objects in this era, such as this blue-glazed powder compact and miniature pigsty, were also similar on this front. This blue-glazed figure jar includes buildings, gods, the Buddha, and a large number of birds and animals. They not only look highly realistic, but also carefree and joyous. Perhaps because through the Three Kingdoms to the Six Dynasties period, there was no centralized government unifying the country. Thus, scholars and learned men often indulged in the scenery and the liberal atmosphere in the Six Dynasties period. Porcelain thus enjoyed much more freedom for development.
Why is porcelain so essential in Chinese culture? Because one not only uses it, it also reveals the taste of those who use it.
In fact, although the ritual-heavy Confucianism had already become mainstream in the ruling class since the Han Dynasty, bronze objects had long been replaced by iron objects. The era of one material gaining dominance was about to be replaced by a time where multiple elements shone simultaneously. Porcelain managed a glamorous transformation from the era of ceramics, but its role would change over the eras based on their various characteristics. This was also why it stayed so much alive. Dong Shuigen believed good local tea came from good local tea tools because he understands the mutual dependence between porcelain and demand. Development only occurs when there is demand. As one of the birthplaces of mature porcelain, Xiaoxiantan laid the foundation for the glory of blue-glazed porcelain from the later Yue kiln. As Chinese porcelain broke through, in Western Europe, the Roman Empire was declining, while the Mayan civilization in South America was blossoming, and a religious craze swept through the Arabic world. At this point, the East and the West were still isolated from each other. But Zhang Qian, Ban Chao, and Gan Ying, among others, had all been to the West as ambassadors, going as far as the Persian Gulf. In the Eastern Jin dynasty, Fa Xian traveled to India for Buddhist scriptures, going there by land and returning by sea. The Silk Road, be it by land or by sea, a glamorous explosion was waiting to happen. China was also gradually coming together once more after a long period of separation, and was about to welcome an unprecedented, prosperous era. Porcelain, whether of its own volition or not, would be swept forward by time, and along with silk and tea, it would bear witness to China's thousands of years of civilization and its history of international cultural exchange.
Steel and iron may be damaged, but porcelain surpasses even steel. It never breaks, never.
Almost every other material destroys itself or is turned into something else as it goes on. Only pottery is there and stays there.
Porcelain trade, this tantalizing symphony that holds no fear for sandstorms or long journeys over tossing waves, stirred heartstrings and reverberates over time once it was played. Before porcelain came along, pottery existed in the world for almost 20,000 years. By comparison, mature porcelain was only 1/10 the age of pottery. Some say pottery was a ruler for early human civilization. The question remains, what role will porcelain play in the future for human history? Head over heels in love, it makes all other beauty pale in comparison.
China has so many quality things.
Forever young, expanding humans' perspective and looking back on history.
We don't need to look to China for the use of blue.
Its glamour guides people across the dark earth in search of their dreams.
When I am the first person looking at the black stone in China,
This is the starting point of the fantasy of the Porcelain Road.